Hey, how's it going, guys? I'm Taylor Shrum, and joining me today is Tyler Dixon.
How's it going?
And we're going to get our names really confused in this podcast and really struggle with that. So that's going to be the nature of this podcast. Now, Tyler just got back from China, and he's going to be telling us a little bit about that. And we're going to be talking a little bit about the future of this podcast going forward, what it's going to be about, and how we can take steps to not get our names confused. So
yeah, very awesome. Yeah, people confuse our names all the time, but they're close, so we give them a little leeway. Other than that, I'm pretty excited to do this. Me and Taylor, we've been talking about doing a podcast for a while now. It's really cool to finally throw something together, throw something we can make and hopefully, have a good time doing. I just got back from 2 weeks, like 15 days, doing a study abroad in Beijing. I was at Beijing Union University.
There you go.
And it was pretty life-changing to go see China and everything about that. So that's basically what probably this podcast is going to be more focused on, just like Taylor's initial questions, my initial reaction, and kind of like what we might be planning on doing moving forward.
Definitely.
But yeah, very cool.
So before we started, I was just about to ask you about the plane flight, and I was getting some grimacing, getting some negative vibes from that experience. But
yeah.
what was the plane like? How long was the flight?
Okay, yeah, for sure. So we left out of Tampa very early. We left Tampa probably like 7 a.m., so we had to leave Gainesville very early at like 4 a.m., and the drive down there was just early sort of thing. And our first part of the flight was just a 2-hour flight from Tampa to Dallas, Texas.
Okay.
We landed in Dallas, Texas, like I think it was like 9 o'clock Texas time, like 10 o'clock here or something like that.
Wow.
And then we had a 13-and-a-half-hour flight from Texas to Beijing, which is the cool part about it is you go directly north from when you take off from Texas. Like logic would have you think like, oh, we're going around the world. You would just go. You would keep heading west, like over California and over the Pacific, but you actually go over the Earth.
Yeah.
So over the North Pole.
That makes sense.
And that was really cool. So about 4 or 5 hours in, we would look over and you could kind of see like some of the ice sheets, like from like the glaciers up there.
Wow.
And that was kind of neat. But the flight itself, on the way there, pretty rough. Initially I was next to some people I knew, but I felt like being a good guy, and these Chinese people came up to me, and right before we got on the plane to Beijing, we could tell we were already like some of the only Westerners there.
Yeah.
And these Chinese people came up and asked me, they had some friends in my seats, and I switched with one of them, so I got put in some random part of the plane in between two people who didn't speak any English on my way to Beijing. And it was such to where like it was 13 hours in like the dead of my day, so I wasn't getting much sleep. Just watched a bunch of movies. Sat next to these people who had less than perfect hygiene. Just because that's another thing which I'm sure we'll get to about China. Nothing terrible, but just as a culture, like things that are interesting to notice. But yeah, 13.5 hours later, landing in Beijing. And right off the bat, just like pulling into Beijing airport, you see how big the airport is.
Wow.
But also just initially just giant architectural differences. Like you walk into just this terminal where you land, and just compared to Dallas, which was a big one where we were. Like I've been to many different bigger airports in America, and just like right away you get the sense of how big everything is you're about to see.
Yeah.
Really intricately designed, like modern type, like ceiling. It wasn't just like on the inside. At least it wasn't just like box type, like communism type structures that you would see everywhere else. But yeah, flight wasn't god awful. Could have been way worse, but definitely not enjoyable. Anytime you're almost 14 hours in the air,
Yeah.
it's a little bit rough.
The most I've done is 9 hours. That was to Germany.
Right.
And that was not that bad, but it was the worst that I've had to deal with. So I can't imagine what 14 would be like. But when you step in the airport in Beijing, you got to be like because airports are always really impressive,
right?
Because it's the city trying to represent itself, present itself as just magnificent. And Beijing does it some of the best. You know, their Olympics recently was one of the most spectacular of all time. So the Beijing airport, you flew into the main one, and it was just glass ceiling.
It wasn't a glass ceiling. It was like it was almost like a large bamboo ceiling, if that makes any sense. All like suspended ceiling in this terminal, but I mean just massive. Like,
wow.
I mean, like a big building here is, you know, maybe like a few hundred feet would be like a normal sized terminal here, with like maybe like, you know, ceilings at like 40 to 50 to 60 feet with like glass on the top with like trees and everything. But like this was just like, I mean, the ceiling was like hundreds of feet up, and this terminal went for probably like a quarter mile.
Goodness gracious.
And it's cool just like the way it was all suspended, because like you could tell right away, and the whole the building had like a crescent shape to it, so it was curving, and the ceiling was also curving like this, but I mean at a giant scale, like, and it was all like made of independent like giant cylinders,
bamboo
looking.
Wow.
Yeah, I'll probably be able to show some pictures soon, but yeah, just right away you could tell like, wow, they definitely have some serious architecture here.
They've really outdone themselves.
Yeah, the airport was definitely yeah, I was kind of looking for like things to be like different right away, and the airport was very Western. Like you'd see like fashion model posters, advertisements, you know, definitely like normal type shopping venues and things like that where we're all around. So nothing too different other than just like everyone's Chinese all of a sudden. Like you notice right away you're like the only Westerner around.
Yeah. Other than the architecture itself, pretty much the body and the guts of the airport was identical to most airports.
Really similar, coming in through customs, coming in through security again. It felt all the same, other than it was just the Chinese government now vetting you instead of the United States and like their version of TSA. Yeah. Which they all spoke pretty decent English, and we got through without too much trouble.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, but other than that, like, it just looked like a very impressive, larger scale Western type airport.
So you arrive with probably a team of like maybe 20 Westerners,
right?
And you know, you get their TSA. You're getting on some sort of transportation to your hotel. That's the next stop.
Yeah. So the next thing we were gonna do, I think there was 10 students overall and 3 faculty.
Okay.
Just my one political science professor, Jen Forche.
Big shout out.
Yeah, big shout out to Jen. Our econ professor, Cersei, he's the man.
Another big shout out.
Yeah, Jake. And then a African lit professor, Nick. Big shout out to Nick. Yeah, and he's also a hip hop professor, so we were calling him Dr. Dre for obvious reasons. But yeah, it was a really cool crew. There was about 10 of us. We'd land, and our first thing we were gonna do was head to the dorms to get settled in. We were all basically hadn't slept for about 30 hours, and off of a 14-hour plane flight that a lot of us didn't sleep on. It's just like you're crammed in, like they're really like squeezing in those economy seats these days.
Really?
Yeah, like I think right now you only get 31 centimeters from like the back of your chair to like where your knees have to end. And I was reading something that they're even shortening it to like another 2 centimeters, and it's just like, yeah. So yeah, get your flights in before that happens, because definitely.
Or get your own jet.
Yeah, get your own jet.
That's the option that I'm exploring. So
it's a smart move. I see why a lot of rich people do it. Flying can be a little rough. But we get there and we went straight to the dorms. But one of the first cool things you notice is how awesomely kept the landscape is in China. Like right on the outskirts of the city, just heading in, there's just like beautiful flower beds. Like the grass is kept to a T. It just looks perfect. Like, and that's just the way they keep landscape. And it's not like this was like specifically special for like coming out of the airport or coming into like an area of Beijing. Like everywhere where there's like government sanctioned, like no, there needs to be flowers here. Like those flowers are going to be like giant perfect and beautifully kept.
Yeah.
And the reason for it is labor is just dirt cheap over there.
Yeah.
So like in America, if we needed like, you know, an acre of landscaping to be done, we would pay like 3 guys $300 to do, you know, 3 hours of work. And those 3 guys would probably get it done. In China, they would get the same work done in the same amount of time, but instead of paying like 3 guys $300, they would pay 300 people $1. So
$1 each?
$1 each. Because that's how communism works.
Yeah.
It's like you have like all these laborers, and like
Yeah.
you got to find them labor to do.
But with that dollar, they could buy probably a similar amount of bread and eggs and milk that we would consume.
Yeah, they would, or I'm not sure how the payment system breaks down, but they're definitely given a decent living, like based upon like their job that they're given. And but when you have like that many more people, all with like very strict rules with attention to detail, like they just, everything turns out to be like really good looking, because now it's not just like 3 guys like, oh, let me finish this up real quick. It's like 300 people who are like, okay, look, these 3 feet for the next 3 hours are my bitch.
Yeah.
And I'm going to make sure that they're perfect, because that's all I have to do for the next 3 hours.
That's interesting. You get a sense of the motivation behind working is not just the money. The motivation is like, this is my contribution to society.
Yeah, so like when you start seeing these things, like a great example of like what kind of put it all into like realization for us, one of the first days there, we were chilling by a bank where we were doing some of our currency exchange, and we're standing by this wall for shade, and we thought it was a brick wall, and I'm looking at it, and it's just a drywall wall. But the government had paid somebody with a Sharpie to stand there all day to draw bricks on it. And you can see where they messed up a little bit. It was definitely drawn on by a marker, but like they just have so much cheap labor that they just get people to do things. Like random things like that. Like it's just blows your mind. Another example of it is in Beijing, like you can just break bottles on the ground.
Yeah.
Like people just throw trash everywhere because there's just street sweepers everywhere. Like their job for life is sweeping the streets. So like on every block you have so many of these people that are just there to clean it up within so much time. Like they'll come by and clean it up eventually. So
it almost sounds like what I envision Santa's like workshop to be. Just
kind
everybody's just happily like working together and making these things.
That's an interesting analogy, but yeah. And so like I was wondering like how does this all get determined? How does it put in place? And basically it was explained so much to me like this. You have like these kids in school, they go through 12 years, kind of like our similar like K through 12 type system. And for the last couple of years, this might not be all right, but I know they had mentioned something about it. Like they're not really tested. They're just like kind of studying all for like their final for their like in their end of their high school. Like they're all just like studying their ass off. And then they take their final exam, and depending on that score, like they'll be given a job to do for the rest of their life.
Wow.
So if you score poorly on it, that's it. You might be drawing bricks for the rest of your life, or taking care of a garden, or sweatshop labor.
Wait, so
like,
it's everyone in the country, regardless of who you are, has to at some point go to like a government building or some kind of civics.
I'm pretty sure it works something that way. If you're like,
everyone takes it.
Yeah.
And if you haven't been exposed to any education, you've just been working in a rice field, and someone asks you,
then you only qualify for like sweatshop and like street cleaner.
Wow.
Essentially, if that's the route you want to take. And
so education is probably the most valuable thing you could get.
Yeah, and because of that, like the kids, like they just, because there's only a handful of universities in China, period. So to qualify for one of these universities, you have to be the absolute cream of the crop. You know, like you scored one of the best, so the government's willing to sponsor your way through like a, you know, computer science degree at one of these universities. Yeah. And it's crazy, like, to think that's how it all goes down there. And for these kids, like, you know, there's just like horror stories where, like, you know, they had a bad day, or their kids going through things that kids go through, and well, you just got struck with, you know, drawing bricks for the rest of your life. Or sweatshop. And it's interesting because, like, again, from a Western, like, we're looking at all of this through like an American point of view, and it's crazy because to us, if a situation like that were ever occur here, like, it would just never fly. Like, our way of living and our standard of living would never allow something like that, and like our idea of freedom and autonomy. But over there, like, they love communism, and you notice it right away. Like, obviously, there's obvious critiques on communism. The communist government has done very terrible things, especially, like, to protesters. Like, they've killed college students. Like, people protest in their own way. But for a huge part of the country, like, probably close to 90% of the people, like, adore communism. You see it in the restaurants. You see it in just their attitude towards how they hold up pictures of Mao and Stalin and Marx.
Let me ask you a question. When you say the word communism, what do you mean?
I just mean, like, their form of government. They call it communism.
Yeah.
Essentially, it's, we're gonna own all the means of production, and we're gonna distribute it evenly to the people, to where everyone lives fairly and happily to a certain extent, and divvy it up differentially based on one's own means, basically based on that test. Or and it works really well for them. Again, there's corruption in it, because there's going to be corruption in anything, and really, like, that's just like people in the government just kind of skim off the top. That's most of the Chinese corruption. But
Yeah.
like, if you want to compare, like, their form of communism, like, there's so many things that are just coming to mind right now. I think the important part is just to make a distinction of why it works so well over there. And that's because you have to look at China 30, 40 years ago. Like, you know, this is right after the communist revolution. Like, there was nothing in China. They were completely living in poverty for a lot of the sense. A lot of their ancient sites were still in ruins. And then, you know, this guy Mao comes along preaching the word of communism, because, you know, capitalistic income inequality kind of took over there with the form of democracy. And Mao went through the fields, got a bunch of peasants essentially, fought a civil war and won. And so now all these peasants who, you know, 30, 40 years ago, literally their only option was, you know, work 18 hours a day in a field to make a little rice for you and your family. If you have a daughter, the only thing she's going to do is that until someone offers you a goat. And that was the reality 30 years ago. And so now when Mao comes along and says, hey, like, we're going to give your daughter a chance to work at a sweatshop for a little money, she can earn herself an education all of a sudden, she can move to Beijing, maybe find herself a husband, like, so... And
how long did that last? How long did Mao's reign last?
Oh, it's still going on. Like, it's still the Maoist communist form of government. I believe he took over in the early 60s, was the Communist Revolution. The democratic government at the time of China, the ones that are in Taiwan now, they were rulers. They were the rulers of China. And Mao, he was already in government and politics, trying to preach the word of communism, trying to do like some sort of political revolution. I'm probably butchering this history. But essentially, they wanted to kill Mao by sending him on this long walk to shame communism around the country. And it's this famous long walk that Mao took with, like, his sons and, like, 90,000 of his closest followers. And along the way, most of them died, including a couple of his sons. But instead of just shaming communism, he was, like, preaching the word of communism. And he literally, like, gathered half the country on his side and just came out of the hills with just AKs and took over for communism and fought the Chinese Civil War, and they won. And ever since then, Mao's literally just been hailed as a superhero, like the bringer of the good times, like the bringer of communism. And what Mao has done for China and the Chinese people is undeniable.
Yeah, you think overall it's a positive outcome?
God, for China?
Yeah.
Oh man, they're crushing it.
Yeah?
Oh, I mean, it's undeniable how great it works for them. But it's a weird situation because it'll only work for them. There's 1.4 billion people over there who 40 years ago had nothing. So if you give them $1 a day, it's going to be great for them. That's the only reason it works. But because it works so well, they're just crushing it. They build a skyscraper a day. Like they are, once you see like their level of business and infrastructure in Beijing, it blows your mind. And for example, like Beijing, I think it's the 4th largest city in China, so not even one of the top 3. 29 million people live in Beijing. 27 to 29 million people. That's the population of Florida in one city. So the size of the infrastructure of Beijing is enormous. It's literally feels like putting Tampa, Gainesville, Tallahassee, Jacksonville, and Miami in Orlando. And that's like half the size of Beijing. Wow. Beijing is just like uncomprehendibly big.
Yeah.
Another great sense of China, and there's just skyscrapers everywhere. IBM, Chinese bank, construction bank this, government building that, huge infrastructure, giant architecture, and you just get a giant sense for it. And I think a good example of that is a couple days in, we're like, okay, we're going to Xi'an in a few days, and I'm thinking okay, small town, this will be pretty cool. Mm-hmm. I can see kind of what a small town. I'm like, are we going to be able to pull out money? Is there going to be ATMs? And they're just laughing at me. Mm-hmm. And they're like, Xi'an is a city of 9 million. That's a million more than New York City. Jeez. This isn't a small town you're going to. This is an international town. And this is just an average small little town in China. Uh-huh. 50 skyscrapers, giant, pulling in. It looks like New York City, and it has a population the size of New York City. Just one city you'd never even think about, Xi'an, China. But that's just every city in China.
So I want to summarize and see if you agree with what I'm saying, and then we'll go to a break, and then we'll come back and talk about the future of the podcast, and then we'll slip back into China talk. So to summarize, basically the Chinese government, however it's developed, I'm not completely sure with the history of all that.
Yeah.
Everything I know basically is what you've told me just now.
Yeah.
So it's developed to bring people equal.
Right.
Make them equal.
Yeah.
And before then, they were basically just kind of this rough capitalist type of thing, because it was every man for himself, and if you wanted to build an empire, you could. But now there's a government that ensures that nobody has their own empire, and it's all equal.
Pretty much. Okay. Yeah.
With some exceptions, obviously, because the government in and of itself is going to be higher. But so in order to sustain, you said 90 million people live in Beijing?
No, it's 27 to 29 million.
And how many people live in New York City, Manhattan?
9 million.
And it's much bigger area.
Yeah, a lot bigger. Yeah.
But so in order to sustain that many people, the people themselves, to keep them fed, for them to earn enough money to buy something to keep them fed, their projects, the things that those people are doing to earn the money to eat the food, has to be, I would imagine, something close to exponential. The growth, in order to keep people fed.
It's crazy.
And that almost seems like an easier economic equation.
It's crazy efficiency. When you see Chinese efficiency, you get it. And it's efficiency that they've been working on for 1,200 years. Mm-hmm. Because you go to the ancient city or the Forbidden City or the Great Wall, and you see these projects that are 1,000 years old, but you see that Chinese efficiency of just we have unlimited labor. These people are going to work for China, and just when you have 40 years of just a billion people saying I'm going to be as efficient as possible for China, they just crank out straight productivity. It's insane.
So whereas America just right now is coming out with social welfare programs, and by just now I mean after the big deal, the big deal, which was that Nixon?
Yeah, it was. Well, no. The big deal was pulled us out of the Great Depression.
Okay, so
that was a lot earlier. I think that was FDR.
Okay.
Yeah, the big New Deal.
So the welfare program, and there were some things like welfare before that, but right now we are just now, pumping the brakes or accelerating on social welfare programs to depend on our government and our way of living and our standard of living to be sustained.
Yeah.
They started with a social welfare program.
Yeah.
And they just started there, and now they're kind of integrating capitalism.
Right.
So it's
kind of flip-flopped.
It's interesting.
But you see, it's interesting because ultimately what'll work the best is a cut right in the middle. You're going to need some social help if you're going to run a country, for these social programs. But you're going to need people who also, because the thing is if I'm some smart kid in China and I want to run a startup, then I want to make some money, that's just not an option. Or if it gets big, it just becomes the government's, and they'll take that startup over. So there's definite critiques that make it terrible for like someone from the West. Like I get why like we have to be so opposed to it just because it would be terrible if it worked here.
Yeah.
But for the people there, they love it.
Yeah.
And another thing about the government is there's no contest. It's just the communists. Like that's it. So they're not bogged down with elections. They're not bogged down with the media. They're not bogged down with any of these things. None of those things. And another thing is like they're completely secular. They condone religion, but not in government, not in any decision. Like so, none of their processes are really like. Religion's always kind of been weird in China. Like even some of their ancient beliefs are off Confucianism, which is more of just like
it's a philosophy.
Philosophy rather than like a spiritual guided religion.
But Buddhism is fairly prevalent.
Right. Yeah, and that's definitely spiritually guided. And I mean, there was just so much. But what the thing I was getting to specifically in the government was they just pure fact and science based without any dissenting opinion on how they're going to teach kids, on what they're going to teach kids, on like it's unreal to really see it.
Very top down.
Yeah. It's
very top down in a way that's like you just do what you're told.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You definitely do what you I mean like, and in America, like, you know, it would be like, all right, we're gonna make half this town relocate to another town. In America, that would never fly. In China, it flies because the guys were like, well, the government told me this one time to move over here, and they put me in like an actual house from like my farm. If they tell me to move to this other town, so be it. You know, communism has got me out of the farm and put me in an apartment with water I can't drink, but lights and like, you know, half an AC. And that's basically all they're doing. But China has a goal by 2022 to completely end poverty in China. And they say they're going to do it.
Yeah.
To what standard not in poverty is going to be? Probably not great.
Because I know that tracking some of the UN's MDGs, their Millennial Development Goals.
Yeah.
The whole like the big iconic bringing 1/3 of the world out of extreme poverty is pretty much thanks to China and India.
Yeah.
But and that 1/3 is like, well, that's pretty much China. Yeah. So I wonder how much of that is a redefining of poverty. You know, it's a little bit of a skeptical comment. And how much is that is like, well, they just pulled themselves up by their bootstraps and did it. You know.
Right.
So
I mean, I would have to say a lot of it has to do with just opening up trade with China in the early 70s. Just like all of our production, basically the world's production got moved to China. You can kind of like look in the unveilings of like kind of Vietnam, why we got into Vietnam, what ultimately was accomplished or what we didn't accomplish in Vietnam. And the fact of the matter is the next year China was on the Security Council and we had opened up relations with them.
Yeah.
And from a American producer standpoint, it was a great win because now you can get all your production produced for a fraction of the cost because now all your labor's in China.
Yeah.
The argument for the consumer was, well, now you get really cheap goods, which is why we have Walmart and like really cheap goods in Walmart. So
it's a win for the producer and a win for the consumer.
Win for the producer. Win
but for the person who works for the producer, maybe not so much in America.
Right. So that's why that works great. But now we have like a lot of problems with factories losing all their workers because they just went away, and that's kind of like where you see that's flip flopped there. The Chinese government's just kind of jumped on that.
All right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we'll cut it off there. Tyler and I are just figuring things out for you guys. We're going to be able to run both of these governments simultaneously by the end of this conversation. But we're going to go ahead and take a break, and we'll be right back.
So.
And we're back.
Land of the free.
Right there.
First one.
It's a weird way to spell freedom, but it's pretty beautiful, if you ask me.
That's right.
So, Tyler's kind of blowing my mind here with all this information, and I hope that he's blowing your mind as well. I think what we're going to do is take a step back and talk about what we're going to do with the podcast. Just to kick it off, my impression of what we're going to do is just kind of, we'll probably hit on a lot of topical issues. So, like, Donald Trump will do a backflip off a high dive, and then in all the media coverage will say this is like a signal that he's turning his view on abortion or something. And so we'll talk about that, and maybe we'll talk about things in our own lives as well.
Yeah.
So,
sure.
And did you have anything else in mind in terms of what this podcast is going to be about?
Yeah, I think more just like observational things, like real things that matter, either in politics or day-to-day life. Try to like talk about things that are going to have a point at least. I think that's a good goal to have, not just talk about nonsense. But just whatever may fall under that category, in and out.
I like it.
See? Yeah.
I think another thing too that I want to do is like talk about things that are encouraging, things that are like useful. You kind of hit on that a little bit, like practical information, and then like deep critical analysis of topical events, not just like, oh, Donald Trump did something that's so silly, I'm a Republican, hoorah. Right. It'll be a lot more deep criticism, like how does this relate to people in China? Like what does this mean historically building up to this? Why maybe is this a significant event? And then also talking about like kind of virtue. For me, that's a big thing, talking about like what it means, like how people ought to live individually. Very, very important. So, well, I think we could slip back into, put the China hats back on.
Yeah, put the China hats. The red hats.
So let's talk about more about like the trip itself, because what you've been able to talk about is what you've observed. But from the Snapchats that I was seeing, which we might include some in here, but what I was seeing was a lot of just intense experience, especially in club scenes. So talk a little bit about the club scene there.
Okay, so the clubs are, it's another level. It's something that I didn't expect, but it makes sense, and it's something you would believe at first. But so we got there right away, and last year I had a buddy who went on the same trip, and he was like, yeah, we kind of messed up because we didn't make a lot of friends. So right off the bat, we were like, trying to see who spoke English, what other people in the international dorms were from countries that spoke English, and we found a bunch of South Africans from South Africa. These dudes were about the party, and I was with a couple of buddies. Turned out, I mean, we're great buddies now. We all met coming on this trip, but they were about the partying also, which was cool because we were all kind of worried we were going to be with a bunch of people who were just kind of trying to take it easy, but these two dudes were not about taking it easy by any stretch of the imagination, so we did not. And like right off riff, we found these guys, and the second night in, they took us to this place called Sullytown, which is a huge bar and club district in Beijing, and they told us, you don't have to bring any money, don't worry about it. Like what, sort of thing. We pull up, get out of the taxi, and like we were kind of freaking out because it's like a 35-minute taxi drive on the other side of Beijing, and like we just got to Beijing, no one speaks English, but we're like, go for it. We get there, and sure enough, we walk up, go into this big club, and like we're thinking like, what is a Chinese club gonna look like? Looks like straight out of South Beach. I'm talking the whole nine, DJ, club, like tables, bottle service, dancers, great sound systems, great lighting, like fog machines.
Wow.
And if you're Western, if you're not Chinese, preferably if you're white, I'm thinking, because we got the best treatment, they give you free entry, no lines, free table, free bottle service all night.
What?
And it's crazy. Like, if you're Western, that's how they, and this is how they do it. It doesn't make any sense, but right when you get there, you notice how much people pay attention to you. Like, the people there, you're in a lot of tourist destinations, so the people there are either from rural parts of China also touristing there, or like bottom line, they don't see a lot of white people, and they look up to Westerners a lot. They look up to Westerners for style, for music taste. They're always trying to be like the West, but they're always just a little bit behind. And you notice that. And talking about what were we just talking about?
Talking about, I mean, what I'm getting the impression of is like the middle class of America's standard of living is higher than their middle class. Right. And so it's not so much that they look up to us as better people. It's that we have like everybody has smartphones.
Yeah.
Like if you don't have a smartphone, you're not in the middle class. Not that anybody who doesn't, or you're really young or something.
Yeah.
Right. And we have like, I guess, fashion, whatever. Like, but yeah, keep going.
Okay, so about the club thing is, so you're Western. The Chinese people who are out there looking to club, they want to club with Westerners. They want to go to places that pulls a lot of Westerners. So
it's like ladies' night. Like you go to a place.
Exactly. That's exactly how it is. It's like what they're like
objectifying
ladies' night.
Westerners.
Yeah, they're literally
pitiful.
Bringing Westerners in to advertise, and they'll come take pictures with you. They want you to stand like by the door to like show like, hey, look, we have Westerners having fun in here. Like, come spend money in our bar. And the Chinese kids, like usually a lot of these Chinese kids like that are going to the clubs, like they're from families with money. They have money themselves somehow. Like they're not coming from the street sweepers, no doubt. And you see it because parked all around is just Ferraris, BMWs, Lambos. I mean, like, oh, dude.
How do they have luxury items?
That's the other thing. Every other car on the road is like a Lexus, a Range Rover, a Mercedes, a BMW.
Is that because of an exchange rate issue, or?
I think it's just because like so many people, like the communist government is so big because they control everything, and there's just levels of bureaucracy to everything. And so within these levels of bureaucracy, you're going to get people earning more from the government directly. So like,
there's no Hondas.
There's a lot of Hondas, but like.
Okay.
But like most cars are like super nice luxury BMWs or Mercedes
in Beijing
at the very least.
I guess Beijing is like the equivalent of like South Beach, like kinda like it's just so wealthy. That's where the communists. That's where the party.
A lot of it, it's home base basically. Yeah.
Okay. That's where their kids are. That's where their family is.
And you see that a lot there. But yeah, if you're Westerners, they have free entry. They just want you in the club, free alcohol, free drinks. You know, like. Free table. They're wild. They're bumping hard. They're playing Western music. They're playing the Kendrick. They're playing the Fetty Wap.
Yeah. Like were doing the newest Kendrick album?
Yeah. Of course. Yeah. You know, like there's Western DJs in there too, and everyone who's a Western is just kind of freaking out, like what the hell? Like they love us over here, sort of thing. Like I was talking to a couple of DJs, and they're like, yeah, man, I stopped playing gigs in the United States because like you come to Beijing one time and just like. The gigs you can get just being Western, just being white, you know, like the way people want to come to you and listen to you is just the whole, You
have instant fame. You don't have to like have a publicist.
That's right.
And they pay you pretty well to do gigs.
Yeah, I mean, like I don't know how much these guys were making, but worth it enough.
Are they working for the government or are they working for a business that owns the club?
Well, they're working for a business that owns the club.
So then
that business probably owns multiple clubs, and then higher up, that business is part of something owned by the communist government.
Oh, so they might not be. So they might be getting paid in like any like the currency. Like it might not be yen. It might be.
Yeah, I don't know how they're getting paid or how much they're getting paid, but like they're getting paid enough to make it worth it.
Yeah.
You know, whatever that is. To live nice in China. And there's nice apartment buildings where like, you know, if you want to pay like a couple $1,000 a month, if you have that, they're like cool, you know, and there's a lot of people who manage that some way or another. And like, it's very weird because I don't understand a lot of it. It's a very intricate form of like control and government, and like I don't know how people get money or how so many people can get the Mercedes that they're driving over there.
Yeah.
Or how you can get in better apartments and whatnot, but
well, it sounds like it'd be really cool to go do some research there.
Yeah,
that would be like one of the most stimulating experiences that somebody could have, in my opinion. Someone like ourselves who are interested in these type of things, go there with a purpose. You know, otherwise you're just going to make a ton of money in some way just because you're Western. You're going to be an entertainer, right? I noticed this a little bit. This is going to be a microcosm example, but I noticed this a little bit when I was on a cruise ship. There was like these different tiers of of employees on the cruise ship, and it kind of correlated with ethnicity. So like the main guy who was telling everybody, you know, hey, we're going to the show in the main stage, right? And he was white. He was like an American guy, probably from like Tennessee or something. And he was like the one walking around telling everybody what to do.
Right.
And then there's like another level. They're like the Australians, and they're like the bartenders, pretty much on the same level as the guy with the microphone. But then, and it kind of got a little bit sad, a little bit like weird, because like the bottom level was the dudes who were folding the towels in my room, and they were like, I wouldn't really necessarily know where they were from, but like Philippines, throw something out like that.
Something, yeah.
And so I'm kind of getting the same impression where like there's like a global class system that's almost emerging, like, which is kind of strange.
Right.
I mean,
I would say it's like there's definitely a class system that you're either like connected to, like it's extreme income inequality, right? So it would be like a super 0.001% of the population has connections to the government. They work high up in the government, or they have like business ties with the government.
Yeah.
They're living like absolute kings. Like, Jen was actually saying that Beijing has like the highest amount of people between the ages of like 17 and 23 who have like access to over $10 million, just because like if you're in the government there, like you're just balling out of control.
Yeah.
But other than that, it's like all low middle class. But that low middle class that everyone is sharing is so much better than what they had. They're all happy with it.
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess that's what just, like, because the question I was going to ask is, like, how do they sustain that system of, I'm a dude who's street sweeping and I get paid $1 a day or whatever, but then I see this kid who really doesn't do anything, but he's the son of this bureaucrat, this government worker, and he, like, how am I going to sustain that? But the $1 a day is 100% more than what he would have gotten.
Exactly.
And so he's just grateful.
Yeah, and so like now that guy who's sweeping the streets, he gets to now chill in Beijing, smoke a cigarette, and get a beer at some bar with buddies, and then go sweep again tomorrow. But before that, it was, I'm just gonna work the same plot of field till I die.
Because that's, or you're not going to eat anything.
Yeah.
You either work or you don't eat.
Yeah.
But now they have a civilization.
Yeah, it's terrible. I mean, like the way I try to look at it is like if capitalism is like an Apple store, and socialism and communism is like going to the DMV, right? It's just like, God, it's government run. It's all kind of shitty. Like the people that you're dealing with are people you don't want to deal with. No one else wants to be there. But imagine like if all you knew was being completely homeless, and then someone was like, welcome to the DMV. Like, you'd be like, oh, the DMV is like the greatest place on earth. Like that's like what everyone in China is dealing with.
Which for everybody doesn't know, the DMV, really quick, is where you go to get your driver's license, and it's notorious for being just the most bureaucratic institution you'll have to deal with in America for the most part. For
the most part.
Right.
And it's just kind of funny, man. Like it's like, because at first you're just like, you people are like okay with living like this, but then you be there for like a week, and then you're like, oh man, like this is all they know. Like, and that's why they're loving it too.
Yeah.
And they're having a good time too. Like it's not all just terrible.
Yeah.
There's bars. There's like great culture going on, like music and whatnot.
Yeah. Do they have a lot of like thriving sports, like leagues, like soccer and baseball?
I know soccer is pretty big over there. I'm pretty sure baseball is pretty big. I didn't see a lot of advertisements for sports. Like there was the Bird's Nest, the Olympic thing that we went to, but
that would be the country to start a sports league. Because it's just like, if you have like the NFL, you have like 4 different NFLs, and you just have an infinite amount of sports going on.
Oh, they could do it, I'm sure. I think like they're just busy, taking over the world. But I think they'll get to that. I
know that recently they put a tax on importing new soccer players, or like international soccer players. So like there are soccer leagues there, and there's this guy Hulk I don't remember what team. I think he's from
Sounds familiar.
not Australia, Argentina,
Right.
or something like that.
Yeah.
If I don't know,
I know
getting
who
that
you're
wrong, it's
talking
going to be
about.
disgusting. But
I
like,
played with him on FIFA.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. And so, but now he plays for some Chinese team,
Wow.
but now they've put a tax. So if you want to bring in a really good player, like if someone wanted to recruit Messi or Ronaldo, they have to pay 100% of what they're going to pay Messi to play. They have to pay 100% of that to the government as well.
Wow.
So they have to pay double.
Yeah.
And that's just Chinese logic, right? It doesn't immediately make sense because you're de-incentivizing bringing in someone who's going to make more people watch TV.
Yeah.
But it makes sense to somebody
Yeah.
there.
Well, like
right?
they're probably just thinking like if they're doing something like that, they probably want to build a just Chinese league.
Exactly.
Which is a lot of what they're trying to do. They're trying to build a lot of just Chinese, a lot of things. Like there was definitely a lot of propaganda, like kind of glorifying the Han, like which is the Chinese like ethnicity. Like they're like 98% Han Chinese. Han. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation, but like the second day we went to this acrobat show and it was called The Incredible Han, and it was just like a bunch of like super talented ethnically Chinese people like juggling shit and like riding motorcycles, just to show like, oh, look how awesome the Han is compared to like other ethnicities, and
which is kind of racist.
Yeah, but I mean like that's like that whole part of the world, like everyone hates each other over there, right? So like Japan hates China.
Yeah.
You know, Taiwan and China hate each other. Like Vietnam and China, like they're kind of allies. Korea and China, like ethnically, like they have issues. Like
you do see a little bit of that with like Germany, France, and England.
Right.
They kind of still have a tight animosity.
But it's different, right? Because like if you're Japanese, you're not caught dead in China. If you're Chinese, you're not caught dead in Japan. And like if you're trying to immigrate there, none of that goes on.
That doesn't happen.
And like it's interesting because you see it in our politics. It's like that never gets brought up when you're talking about, you know, how the Asian world deals with each other. Like there's just no immigration. They don't care who's slaughtering who in the Philippines. They don't like, you're just not coming over here. Like if you're not Japanese, stay out of Japan essentially. And like to them that just makes sense. Like the Chinese are like, if you're Chinese, you should be Chinese, you know.
That makes me think to what extent has the West kind of secured Japan? Because theoretically, I mean, if you're saying there's this much animosity, Japan doesn't have a military. All they have is like,
it's kind of like South Korea also.
Yeah, they're only allowed to have a defensive military. So China at any given time could conquer, especially with the level of efficiency they have, could conquer Japan, Korea.
I think at this point,
boom.
Easily.
So it to me, it's like there's got, like, those are kind of this Western strongholds. Hong Kong, maybe you could make the argument too.
Yeah, but the Chinese Communist government has started to, I think they're completely in control of Hong Kong again.
Yeah.
So that'll all probably go away. But yeah, that's definitely a good point as far as like those cities being there. I think just after World War II and after the Korean War, we just completely came in there and we stayed there, and we just like basically took over their form of government and kind of like held their hand until they were a country once again. And on their own they couldn't stand against China, especially what China's been able to accomplish. And that's like the crazy thing also is like, because 20 years ago when all this Cold War stuff was going on, like if we're talking like early 80s, like that's only 20 years after the entire Civil War. Like China was just moving, just starting to get up. Like now they've been doing that for 20 years. Like China has been like a serious player and exploded in like the last 10 to 15. So like while we've been like super concentrated on all these other like this election, that election, this little proxy war, this little thing in the Middle East, like China has just been like churning its industry, churning its productivity. And
I know that its GDP is like one of the highest in the world, and like the fact that it's only at 7% is pretty low for it. But America's GDP is at like 2%,
right?
And we're like thrilled about that.
That's
interesting.
It's just crazy how much they're able to make so quickly.
Talk about the pollution though, because that's definitely negative.
That's kind of what I was going towards. Like, there's definitely huge negative aspects. One is obviously the pollution. You see it right away, right when you get there. Like, it kind of just looks like a haze of fog that never burns off all day. It's just like, no, that's the smog. At certain times, it comes in thick. Like later in the evening, it'll come in and, like, you know, looking at a street light, you know, 100 yards away. In like the light of the street light, you can see the haze and the smog, and like it's just pretty nasty. I think I was hearing statistics that like 20% of people in China are now dying of lung disease. Like, the water, you can't drink it. There's way too many minerals and like bad metals in the water, like too much iron. You got to be real careful. Like, it's just what I compare it to is like, if you were in Detroit in like 1905 or like 18, whenever like the heart of our industrial revolution was, it would be disgusting. It would just be like smoke everywhere, shit in the streets, smog, like, because we were going through an industrial revolution. Because
there's so much demand, in Detroit specifically, there was so much demand for automobiles that they couldn't make them fast enough.
Right.
And so there's no reason to stop and start regulating the amount of pollution.
So like, China is trying to do what we did in 80 years in 20 years. And so like, smog is just one of the byproducts, one of the negative byproducts of that. Another one is social lag. So like, the people 30 years ago were all living in the fields. And so like, socially, there's just things people that are doing over there that would just never fly in the West. Like, kids are like using the restroom in the streets. Like, people are still hogging like nasty loogies. Like, personal hygiene is not on the up and up, just because like they're trying to do what the West did in 200 years, essentially moving out of the fields and out of the farmhouse into the city in 20 years. You know, and there's a huge social lag from that. The kids are starting to get it. The kids seem pretty cool. But definitely in the older like generations, just like before that, they had nothing. So there's just lag.
Wow. So there's just so much to think about. I can't even imagine. Like, my brain would just not be able to shut off.
Like, I can't even. It's so hard to just process and comprehend that like, I was there and now I'm back. Being back doesn't even seem real. Just, it's hard to wrap my mind around that those two places can exist on the same planet. Like, me and you can have this conversation really sleepy, quiet Gainesville, Florida. And like, Beijing is going on right now. And the fact that Beijing is 4 times the size of New York City, which is not even the biggest city in China, and just like small Chinese cities like Xi'an are the size of New York City. Like, they probably have 70 New York cities over there. That I'll never go to. That are all as big with as much shit going on.
And that's what I find myself thinking sometimes when I'm just like caught in a relatively mundane situation. I'm just like thinking about all of the insanity that's going on in the world. Just like not even violence, just like people doing things that I'll never observe. But in my imagination, there's kind of like that just churning, like, and then to have you come here and tell me about Beijing, just like hundreds of New York cities compiled into one. They're just like doing stuff non-stop.
And on every block in every one of those cities, you need someone to clean the streets, you need a plumber, you need an architect, you need a contractor, you need a bartender, you need a business clerk, you need people to run the businesses, like, and that goes on every day, you know, in all over these cities in China. And it was crazy because like, one part of me like kind of felt like intimidated by it all. Like, wow, like, I mean, what China has got going on, it's undeniable. Like, once you see it, and once you like spend time there and you see their efficiency, you understand that it's not going to be pretty by Western standards, but like, China is just they're crushing it over the next 200 years. Like, China will be happy and stable in 200 years. I can't say the same about the West and like America and like what we got going on. So from like a humanity standpoint, it was awesome to see what their section of humanity was able to accomplish over the last 1,000 years in their own way. And also how just like, I think regardless of how bad people mess up in the West, like, humanity will prevail through China. Like, the Chinese just have it on such lock right now that the only thing that's going to stop the communist regime right now is just complete World War III nuclear war.
Yeah.
That is it. Other than that, China will be chilling and happy in 2300 in my mind. And like that's a good thought from like a humanity standpoint. Like there probably still going to be people kicking.
Yeah.
But from a Western standpoint, like I think we just got to have like people understand like what they got going on over there, and
it's not. They're organized.
They're ungodly. Got their shit together.
So, Xi Jinping recently visited Donald Trump. Xi Jinping is the
president.
For all intents and purposes, the president.
Yeah, like
the highest ruler.
The main chair of the Communist Party right now, chairman.
Yeah, in China. And he just met Donald Trump in Fort Mar-a-Lago, Florida.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
What do you think they talked about?
So, like, a couple of things I know from that meeting is they came over and Trump brought him to Largo, which isn't, like, the official, like, House of State, which is weird. I think what was funny was, like, Trump, he tried to brag, from what I heard, to them by showing him the campaign results. And, like, you're showing election results to a Chinese government. Like, the fuck could they care about campaign results, you know?
They
like,
could care less.
I don't know. I think Donald
Probably
Trump...
don't even really know what that even is, to some extent.
They don't have campaigns. They're not worried about elections. What can an election mean to them, you know? It's really weird. I don't know how they view Donald Trump because there's such a attention to detail, just absolute fact. Like... whatever works, we're only going to use facts, like methodically planning type conscious and like form of government stability over there, that they just probably look at Donald Trump, and I think they're more thinking about like, they know like they're going to rule the world in 2300, but they probably look at Donald Trump and they're like, oh, if you just want us to rule the world now, like that's cool too. Like, because Trump is just like, he's a loose cannon, you know what I'm saying? Like, if you're gonna brag about election results to a communist government, like, I mean...
with that being said, though, he has the big slogan, and to what extent he actually is pursuing this end, make America great again.
Right.
So that kind of, in light of everything you're saying, makes it seem like some people are trying to push forward for America to awaken and do some stuff again. But,
well,
what does that even mean, though? Like,
I think personally, like, if you're just gonna like break down into like what I think personally, I mean, this is just like a viewpoint. People will probably like not think it's true or whatever, but I think we lost a lot of our factory jobs. We lost a lot of our middle class jobs, and you know, we got lower price goods. Our CEOs made a lot more money than our workers did, and our workers started to take a tank. And the workers started to get aggravated. They started voting Republican because, like, Republicans kind of put on the face, like, you know, we're the class of the working party, and if you're going to work hard and earn your keep, then vote Republican. While the Republicans just made the billionaires so much richer, and people got frustrated that their right-wing votes weren't bringing back the results that they needed. And just like, it happens throughout history, like that happens where like there's poor economic times, and someone capitalizes on that fear with a slogan, with an ideology. And I think that's all Donald Trump did with that. He wants to bring back coal. And that's like the only move he's made right now economically, as far as how we're gonna like bring back like the America first. And just from the coal deals, it's like, I read one statistic that Arby's had more employees than the entire coal industry. And I think that solar and wind power had, I think, 8 times as many job prospects than coal. So if he was going for, you know, economic growth in a place, like, he's just doing it completely backwards.
The thing with Donald Trump is everybody has an opinion in America. Everybody's like, Donald Trump's like, I'm going to build a wall. If Xi Jinping said he wanted to build a wall anywhere, it would be done the next day. Just because he didn't even have to say it. He just thinks it. People are like, ooh, he probably wants a wall. Let's go build it for him. Like, Donald Trump, he brings up building a wall. Everybody in America gets on Twitter, is like, no. Or, and they have something to say.
Right.
And that's American individualism, and that's worked for us in a certain way.
Right.
But if we want to get a big project done, like NASA, for example, in the 60s, that was a big thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's a case study that we were able to accomplish something insanely massive together, and that was kind of a top-down effort to some extent.
Yeah.
Scientists and science kind of plays its own role in that. But yeah, I mean, when was the last time we organized as a society to do something big outside of the military? Like, it's basically just a slow growth, like kind of organic,
Right.
emergent thing that happens, because every big thing that happens usually is the result of one corporation or a couple of corporations doing something.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
It's a group of individuals who are taking initiative to build an iPhone or
to make a Southeast conference.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
to make like,
Yeah.
a few companies put together like
Yeah.
an event or it's definitely when you compare it to how we try to run capitalism, it's just like the Chinese, they know they're not going to have to worry about putting a lot of effort in re-election. They know they're not going to have to worry about someone slandering their name or their campaign. So what they're worrying about is how they're going to pull Chinese out of poverty by 2022. And when they do that, they're going to worry about, okay, then how are we going to have like the biggest military by 2050? And when they do that, they're going to figure out like, how are we going to make sure by 2075 we own like all the trading in the world? Like, and they'll just do things like that because they're thinking about that. They're like, right now there's a discussion going on about 2200 in China. Like, right now our senators spend like, I think it's like 60% of their time and effort just trying to get reelected for another 2-year period. Like, nobody is thinking about. And what do we say? We kind of say like the free market will work it out. And yeah, that's true to a certain extent, but like, there's no real oversight worried about 200 years from now in this country.
Well, that's because what the government in America is set up to do, and what the founding fathers set up to do, is the government isn't supposed to do anything. It's not supposed to go forth and create.
Right.
It's supposed to make sure that businesses and individuals and Elon Musk can go forth and create.
Right, exactly.
Elon Musk is like the guy, and there's plenty of people like him, right? He's not the only champion of this, but I think he's living in the world that we need to be living in mentally. Like, he's the one who's like, this government is not going to get anything done. Like, they're here to make sure people don't kill each other in the process of pursuing their own liberties and rights. And whereas the Chinese government is like, they are the ones who do things. But so it's really interesting. It's
a weird
infinitely
breakdown.
interesting.
I think ultimately, like, if you were to compare like constitutions and like bare bones system of government, like our system of government, we have so much to be thankful for. Just like our basic liberties, our individual liberties, like even our form of economics, like capitalism is awesome. It works absolutely the best for the most amount of people, for the best standard of living, like hands down 100%. I think the problem arises when just too much income inequality comes out of capitalism. And when you look at the original Constitution, it was kind of designed to stay away from elections. Like, there wasn't big elections going around for definitely not president. I don't even think representative. I think just the House of Representatives were the only thing that's like the people had a say. And now like the people have to say so much, and it's all kind of just been manipulated by either big media, controlled by big government, which are just controlled by huge billionaires at the top, and they're able to manipulate so much to create all this unproductivity that we're now seeing in America. And I don't know how to fix it, but I just know that in China they have a solution that works and is creating a lot more efficient outcome for the time being. It doesn't look good for human rights over there, just because like you get what you do and that's it. If you're gonna slack, there's no time for slacking. Like then you're just gonna be sweeping streets, which sucks. Like there's so much we enjoy in America that we just like take average for granted. And just like how many times like when we were like 15, 16, we just like took like a day to like relax and slack. And like, well, if you have that mindset in China and you take that day to relax and slack, well, maybe like you just lost a few points on your exam and you'll be like, get a terrible job for the rest of your life.
Yeah. Well, Jordan Peterson, who's someone we've both been influenced by a lot recently, in one of his latest or YouTube videos watching of him, he was talking about how American college students are like, they are the folks who society have carved out this economic shelter around. So in this time of our lives, we can do anything we want. You know, me, like, I have a part-time job. Like, in the history of the hundreds of thousands or the thousands of years that has led up to this moment, people have not had the choice to have a part-time job.
Right.
Whereas, and a lot of people I know don't have jobs at all, and so they have time to just do whatever they want. And I think in America, like, we've used that time to not do a whole lot,
right?
To serve ourselves, to consume things, and that's not any fault of any specific person. I think it's ultimately necessary for the growth of our corporate sector, right? For us to consume at that level is necessary. But I think that what the Chinese have been doing is just so much, the marginal impact on society of each individual person is so much greater. And when I see the intensity and the passion of Jordan Peterson when he's talking about how college students have this time where society has just like literally built a shield, an economic shield around them to just study and absorb wisdom. It's just like this it's this huge responsibility. And being a college student is almost one of the most responsible, burdensome tasks you can be. But it feels the opposite.
In a lot of senses it is, because like it is such a rare time where like society is just cut out, like, okay, you guys are gonna have it super easy for 4 to 5 years to either set yourself up, you know, to do something great with your life, or the way I've heard it put really well is just have your best years now. Like, because like I could go to college and just, you know, like drink and party hard, and I'll just have the best days of my life right now, and then I'll probably be working hard, paying for that mistake for the rest of my life, or at least earning a college degree a lot later, doing it a lot more difficultly. But if you come to college and you work hard, then you set yourself up for a lot better days in the future, with better jobs, getting paid more, with a higher standard of living, to have a family, to do these things that would be tougher without college. And I think a lot of Americans kind of they take it for granted. I've seen that a lot, to where a lot of them will just be lazy with that time, or they won't pursue the correct type of knowledge, or knowledge that'll like really like set them up to be like worldly and understand like shifts, or understand like the reason things are going down around them. And it's crazy.
Well, I think looking forward, the type of leader that's going to really change all this is going to be someone who is like Elon Musk, someone who gets where America's mind should be. It should be, let's shoot for the moon. Like, if we want to build a wall. Like, if you want to do something, do it. Don't just like...
It's just a shame because like America could be like that with like, if America would like have like the concerted effort, and it's weird, right? Because like everyone were to say, if there was a meteor heading at the world right now, and we all knew about it, like the world would come together and be able to like figure out how to move that meteor out of the way for the sake of the world. Ronald Reagan actually had a great quote in one speech where he was like, if aliens were to come down, the world would come together to like try to like figure out a solution. That was just like his meteor. And like in our day and age, like we have that meteor, and it's global warming. And like you can really see the, like, I'm kind of more of like,
that's what this podcast is really about.
It's just a global warming plug. But like seeing it in China and watching people like not being able to breathe, they're wearing masks already, and it's just simply because like the government is putting country first over individual, and if the country needs factories, if the country needs skyscrapers, well, then the individual is not going to be able to breathe, and that's just a cut they're willing to make. And it's just a shame because like our whole world is kind of faced with this common issue right now, and no one's really willing to really, you know, work together and find common ground on it. And
it almost kind of makes me think about like that myth that was going around that humans only use 10% of their brains or something. It almost seems like we're humanity as a whole, like as we kind of make up the surface of this planet, like the thinking aspect of this planet, like we have kind of just used something like less than the optimum amount of our brain, you know. But what would it look like if we were just perfectly organized? Like, would we have built like spiked pyramids and like colonized the entire universe by now? Like,
I just think.
And what does that really prove? Like, what does that really get us? Like,
yeah, it's interesting. I know there's like ancient mythology around this. There's like a story. I don't want to say it's the Bible. I don't want to say it's the Bhagavad Gita, but it's a book along those lines where it's like the temple of something, like a name, like a pyramid of something, and it's just like a pyramid honoring if everyone had the ability to speak the same language, like how much humanity would be able to accomplish.
yeah.
Like if we all could put our differences aside and we just like work towards a common goal, like how great that would be. And it's just the same because, like, back to my analogy, like we have this big meteor in our face, which is global warming. Like in China, you can literally go see the smog. You can literally go see like the polar ice caps melt. You can literally go see what that's going to do to Miami in like a decade. And the solution's so obvious. Like America could like be the absolute world innovator in solar, in wind, in all these new technologies, which would put people to work. It would completely like revamp our infrastructure. It's already an industry that's bigger than coal and natural gas. We would like, you know, they would change automotives. It would change the roads potentially. Like there's just so much money to be made in that, and it would put America on top of a lot of things again. And I think it's just such like red hand just to show like how much of an issue we have with how corrupt our government is. It's just because like we'd rather adhere to big money than go for just this obvious solution.
That
like,
brings everyone together.
Yeah. Globally too.
Yeah.
And it's a shame, especially with like Donald Trump pulling out of like the Paris Climate Agreement. Like what's the first thing China does is China says we'll step up. We will be the world leaders in climate change. And by 2030 they have this pledge to ramp up. They're gonna have like the most solar and the most wind by 2030 over everybody. Like because they know it, like by 2100 it's probably gonna be mostly you know, clean, and it's just like, well, wouldn't you want America to get there first anyway? But we said no. China's also reopening all of their trade routes around China. They want to like reestablish the Silk Road, and it just goes to show that like China wants to be like the global voice, the global voice of stability, and it's just like I don't know how to fix it. I think it's interesting to at least talk about it, go see it, go see how China works, and just because the only thing we have in America is just like the ability to talk about things and the ability to recognize when things are going wrong, and then hopefully get more people to realize that, because like
and the internet that leverages that ability.
Right, and it's so important
what we're doing right now,
especially things like Joe Rogan, and but you just got to talk about these things, and I think education is so important, because I don't think we're ever going to gain any like leverage on any of these major global issues where we're going to like, you know, one day try to be friends with China, or one day try to like find a common ground between capitalism and communism to where we can like globally work together and not go to war. I think the first thing you have to do is like have an electric that, you know, by graduating high school can give you a definition of communism, capitalism, socialism, liberal, and Democrat. Like,
you gotta be able to know that stuff.
And they simply can't. Like, I don't even think, like, I'm studying political science, and I don't know how I would do on like a serious political science test leaving high school. And just like basic definitions of communism, basic definitions of democratic socialism, like basic definitions of even capitalism. Like, how many high schoolers today like could like give you like a working example and definition of capitalism? Not enough.
It would be like playing a sport and not knowing which teams were different from each other. It's not important to like get on a team and like chant for your team for the sake of the team. It's irrelevant bullshit. What's important is to identify, okay, why would this player go against this player? Like, what is the difference here? And like, they're both right to some extent. They're not both idiots, right? Why are they disagreeing, and who do they represent? What is the tradition that would compel them to believe these differing opinions? It's interesting that you bring up that old religious. You didn't remember the text, but it was like something where if we only had one language, then we could conquer everything. Well, it's interesting in the Bible. There's a story about the Tower of Babylon.
Maybe that was it.
Which, well, it's the opposite though of what you described, because what happens is, I guess they're Jews, building this tower, and it's a tower that's going to get them to God. They're going to ascend and go to God. And this isn't a parable. This is like, or a metaphor. This is actually what was going on. And then God scrambles their language, and that's like the myth of how language came about. Myth might be a strong word.
I think that was the story.
Yeah, and so what happens is they scramble the language, and so they can't work together now. And I think that what I take away from that story in the context of this conversation is America, China, that's kind of what we've been talking about today. Like, those two systems, the systems themselves, they will never be pure enough to do anything. Any system could work if the people focus on what is within them, their morals and their motivations. Because ultimately, communism or capitalism or democracy, any of them could do, as long as people are committed to each other. And like the goal is, I want to help you, you want to help me. It's not, and capitalism does an amazing job of leveraging people's self-interest and their selfishness, and it works. This is what we're experiencing, the fruit of that beautiful mechanism that our founding fathers came up with. Communism tries to go against selfishness, I feel, and like makes people equal, and that's worked for them to some extent. But really, I believe there's no structure, and especially there's nothing we can build with our hands that's going to make the world better. It's looking within. And a lot of times, the first step that you make from doing that is not building anything. It's just caring about people, and finding those people who are in poverty and just bringing them out of poverty.
I mean, like, they say 2022 we're not going to have anybody in poverty in China. Like, maybe by 2050, like, that's a really good deal for everybody. And then like the critiques on capitalism or on communism become like smaller and smaller and smaller. I mean, there's always going to be a Western critique on capitalism just because like people aren't going to live long.
And because of what happened in Russia during the Soviet Union.
Well, I mean, disaster. Just because, like, the way they tried to go about it, sort of thing. And, like, Mao killed 50 million Chinese. Like, it wasn't like a, like some, like, little walk in the park. Like, it was a heavy civil war. So, I think that's a really good point you make. Like, I think it's got to be both of us looking within, finding compromise between our own systems eventually. Like, if we're ever going to have a shot at globalization or any real, like, anything other form of stability other than just, like, we have nukes, you have nukes, or we do trade, so we're not going to kill each other, then we're obviously just going to have to look within. And,
the fact that we already have nukes is evident that we've kind of completely neglected the looking within part, because we would never have produced the concept of a weapon of this magnitude. The only weapons that we would have if we cared about each other would be for sport or for some sort of enjoyment, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Perhaps killing animals to eat them, right?
Yeah.
So it's interesting, but I think
we need a lot more meditation in society. Maybe some psychedelics or something to get that third eye open.
That's right.
Looking in.
Just need more love.
That's right. Well, that's probably a good way to end it.
That's right. More love and Budweiser.
Yeah, Budweiser for sure.
Bud heavies. All right. Well, that was our first podcast. I think that was pretty good.
Podcast 1.
All right. Keep looking out for more.
Right on.